to the new challenges. And I formally declare on behalf of Mukhtar and the AUC the event open. Olaf, over to you.
Thank you very much. So, Excellencies, because I think there might be diplomats and ministers among you, distinguished guests, colleagues, and I'm sure among that they are here, friends. When I was asked to give a perspective on cybersecurity in the times of COVID-19, I was honored, but also I find it a little bit of a challenging task. But first, I'm proud and humbled to address a group of people who have the opportunity to shape the future of the continent for good. A group of people who are building a new collaborative structure in which they have the opportunity to shape the opportunities of others on this continent by making Africa's cyberspace more secure and trustworthy. Cyberspace and cybersecurity, and you might find this surprising, are words that are somewhat meaningless to me. For me, when I talk about cyberspace, it consists of two parts. Firstly, the computers, individual systems and software that allow us to digitize the information around us and perform calculations on that information. It's sort of the top left part of this slide you see here. In the early days, that would be an IBM mainframe that would digitize the business information to calculate revenue, tax, or profit. Nowadays, it's your digital camera or this microphone that transforms light or sound and stores that in the cloud or does something else with it. It's this part of cyberspace that is all about digitizing the analog world, the world around us, capturing it, and subsequently using that data in our daily lives. So that's one part of cyberspace. The other part of cyberspace, to me, are the networks. Networks that help to transport the digitized information. Transport it to a place where it's needed, where you can perform calculations on it, where you can base decisions on that information, and where the value can be created out of that information. The internet is a network of networks, and it allows you to transfer the information beyond your local network, and it helps to connect us all globally. And it is the internet, to me, that made the cyberspace a global phenomenon. Without the internet, the network of networks, you cannot reap the benefit of cyberspace. Without computing infrastructure, you can't either. But without the people who understand, operate, study, invest, and govern the lot, you will find yourselves not having any, or you will be pretty ineffective of reaping the benefits from cyberspace. So it's about the network, it's about computing, and it's about brains. Those are three types of capacities that one needs to develop when one wants to move to the forefront of cyberspace. Three types of capacities that by themselves have different areas of specialization too. One of those specialties is security, which I will talk about. And since I care about the internet, that's where I come from as Internet Society, I will be looking at the security through an internet lens, not exclusively, but more or less. This is a session that was sort of inspired by COVID-19. I will not talk a lot about COVID-19, but COVID-19 and security. Security controls are usually based on expectations about human behavior. When that behavior suddenly changes, weaknesses get exposed. In the case of COVID-19, we saw that people took their works to their homes. Suddenly, computers that were normally operating behind an office firewall found themselves inside a home and unprotected against unexpected traffic and attacks. Data that never left the office before and now suddenly was carried around to a local coffee shop. Mails that usually would only arrive in the office are now read at home. And people who never used computers before or the internet before now rely on them for doing sensitive business. Think of the many people who used internet banking for the very first time simply because they could not go to the bank because of COVID-19. It is as if everybody moved outside of the protective walls, and that's sort of what the image tries to convey. Looking at this from a security lens, it's all about trying to take into account the unexpected. And obviously, COVID-19 was an unexpected event. It is about understanding what scenarios are ahead and about making informed choices to confront the risks. Now, with internet, that's not only about protecting your own assets. It's not protecting your computers against things that happens to your assets. But for the internet, you also have to make sure that you protect the assets that the internet by itself provides. So you have to take care of protecting your networks so that users of your networks cannot attack others. On a somewhat higher level, I would argue that computers and network security comes with a specific mindset. A mindset that continuously looks for eventualities, sketches scenarios, and think about what the results will be if things go different than planned. It's a very useful skill to have. And in that context, I want to ask a few questions for Africa, questions that are about security, securing your own future. So, network, computing, and brains. Let's talk about the internet infrastructure. That's my first question, internet infrastructure. The network of networks is needed to connect all those computing resources together. How can Africa grow if it doesn't have the networks? How can Africa grow if there's no resilient internet? If traffic cannot easily flow from A to B and from B to C? The internet itself was designed to be resilient under stress. And COVID-19 demonstrated that even though some individual network topped under stress, the internet as a system did not. It easily adapted to the new circumstances. The security of the network as a whole depends on the resiliency of the individual networks and the networks among each other, so to speak. It depends, and that in itself, the security of that system depends on collaboration, but it also allows for competition. It allows for competition on your local network. You can build to your customers, but by collaborating on getting internet provided to everybody, it depends on collaboration. The internet in Africa is still being built, and there are enormous opportunities. But there are also complications. As you well know, the pool of IPv4 addresses is shrinking fast, and it's important to put the remaining IPv4 addresses to Africa's best use. But by making IPv6, the new version of the Internet Protocol, an integral part of your network design while you're building out networks, there is an opportunity for Africa to get ahead of the global curve. Then the question is, of course, will Africa build an internet of opportunities, a network that can enable African entrepreneurs? Or will you be building a network where every service comes with a separate price tag, where, you know, if you connect for a video service, you have to pay a different fee than when you connect for a voice service or for Zoom or for a bunch of apps? Because such price tags create barriers for those same entrepreneurs that you want to grow. So, network, computing, and brains. Let's talk a little bit about computing. Or talk about digitization, to be more precise. About the ability to record the world around us and store it as digital information, and then perform computing to drive our actions. To me, the big question for Africa is how to keep control over your own destiny, how to make sure that those systems are well understood, secure, and do not impact Africans in a negative way. All these systems that measures and compute and so on and so forth. I realize this is not about security anymore. So let's focus on the security for a moment. When we digitize our environments and we have those data used by ourselves, by companies or by governments, then the security of all the components that use those systems needs to be guaranteed. If you measure crop growth, security issues will make you lose your harvest. In a city with smart traffic, people may get killed in traffic accidents if you don't take care of security. If you measure human behavior, you make critical mistake if its interpretation is biased because of assumptions around race and gender. And when the measurements made of humans, you and me, fall in the wrong hands, that has dire consequences too. In order to understand these complex systems, my belief is that you have to understand the building blocks that make these complex systems. And understand what the consequences are of those building blocks failing. You don't have to understand the system as a whole or not completely, as long as you understand those building blocks and the interactions of the building blocks with their environments. That is a good step in order to get to a comprehensive understanding. I think that it is of critical importance that Africans within their nations, but also as regional partners and collaborators, figure out their role as the world around them gets digitized and the world in Africa gets digitized. What is the role of African entrepreneurs and security specialists in deploying the technologies? What are the dependencies on Western, Eastern, Northern technologies and industries? Since every aspect of our society is being digitized, it's going to be hard to address these issues centrally and tightly control any of the results. In order to get to a resilient and secure African cyberspace, the various stakeholders will have to take their own responsibility in a decentralized manner and take actions to secure the African networks and all the cyber resources that I was just talking about. So we just talked about the Malabo Convention, and the African Union has produced in collaboration with the Internet Society 2 documents. One with Internet infrastructure security guidelines and one containing personal data protection guidelines for Africa. These documents, I won't go into them, are very specific guidance to specific stakeholder groups. About specific issues, and that's the point. It's what I'm trying to demonstrate with this example is that this is the building block approach. That this is about understanding very specific components in the bigger cybersecurity infrastructure. It's an approach of taking problems in palatable portions by the stakeholders that can effectuate the change and that are impacted by that change. When working on security, our overall goal should be to create trustworthy systems. And trustworthiness is a word that I choose on purpose instead of trust. Trust is a perception. You can trust things or persons that are not worth your trust. Trustworthy is an inherent property, and it's not a perception. And as such, you can improve trustworthiness by technical means, and you can usually measure the increase of the trustworthiness by testing. For instance, think of boats. You know, people have figured out if you compartmentalize boats, then you get less fatal accidents when boats get holes, and that makes boats more trustworthy. They sink less often in case of accidents. So, as another example of a building block approach, at the Internet Society, we work on a few topics that increase the trustworthiness of the Internet. And again, these are just these are important building blocks, we believe. One is work that we do in the context of routing security, where we try to have network operators implement practices that make routing system more secure. It's called manners. We are also working on the deployment and development of, by the time community, of communicating time of the internet, the security of communicating time on the internet. And I won't bore you with the details, but time is of critical importance for our security. But again, this is a tiny building blocks in which specialists are working. And the third thing that we do is we explain that encryption technology is one of the most effective building blocks in creating a trustworthy infrastructure and digital devices. And people should be conscious about applying those technologies in the right way and making sure that encryption technologies do not get undermined. And those are just a few details and, specific issues. So, but we believe these are sort of essential for the cybersecurity future, just like other ones. And don't get me wrong, I'm not expecting anybody to know everything. The knowledge will need to be captured in a network of specialists that each have deep expertise about some individual components. And you have to do that in order for Africa to determine its own destiny. Which brings me to the third question in network computing and brains. It's the brains, the human capacity to deal with the challenges and the opportunities. If African nations want to take care of their destiny, they first have to make sure that they do not have to outsource all of the design, the operations, the maintenance, and the security to outsiders. Outsourcing the security of the digital infrastructure to outsiders, and I use that term fairly loosely, is like being defended by mercenaries. Your people, the African people, are needed to perform all these tasks, and I think that is a big challenge. Africa will need to develop its capacities to take control over its destiny. It will need practitioners of all sorts. It will need network engineers, computer scientists, programmers, security people, policymakers that understand the relevant aspects of technologies, and technologists that understand what is on the mind of policymakers. You need African diplomats to help to prevent that Africa becomes a cyber battleground. In the internet community, there are a number of initiatives where experience and best practices are shared. Initiatives that enable learning on the job. I think that that is an important part of creating a capacity. I think of conferences like the FNOC meeting, where trainings and hackathons are organized, and about meetings like AFPIV, where network engineers share their experience and their learnings. For a more policy-oriented capacity building, I can think of the Global Forum for Stability of Cyberspace, where experience around cyber is shared globally. What I'm saying is that collaboration is the kernel from which many great things can grow. If it comes to African cybersecurity, then this group is one of the kernels that can help grow the human potential. It is a group that has the understanding of the complexity involved in how cyber interweaves with society and what the security aspects are that play a role in that. If there's, in my career, if there's one thing that I learned, then it is that collaboration is the internet way. It's the only way by which you create an internet out of a network of networks. And I think you have to apply that to people too. And it's my hope that through collaborations like this one, Africa gets a strong voice and can help to shape the future of its own continent. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Olaf. That was concise and very, very poignant. Gentlemen, ladies, we are going to put all the questions at the end, but I would like to note that thank you, Anthony Hall, for at least kickstarting the first question, but we will address all of the questions at the end because I also have a few. So if we could move to the next slide, and basically this is by, I think, Dr. Sharif. And basically, he's going to take a relatively high-level strategic view of the strategies for Africa. So, Dr. Sharif, are you ready?
I am ready.
Please,
thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, it's a pleasure and privilege to be part of this webinar. I think it was highlighted clearly at the beginning the challenges that Africa faces now in the COVID-19 the pandemic era and beyond. With the rapid digitization, where the internet and ICTs now are becoming central to our daily work at the personal level, at the organizational level, at the governmental level, globally, and in Africa, of course. This is quite the right time, a high time for really thinking about security, privacy in this era. Next, please. I will try to highlight in my talk really the main pillars of an African cybersecurity strategy based on international principles and norms that are adopted broadly. I will start with really sharing with you some of the outcomes of the United Nations group of governmental experts that have been working on cybersecurity trust and confidence and security over the past 10 years. I will share with you the outcome of the UNGGE reports that were adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations, and as such they are applicable to all countries globally and to the African continent. So these could be norms and principles that can be used for an African cybersecurity strategy collectively and individually in all states. Next, please. So if we want to navigate through the principles and norms, the current list includes 11 norms and principles. And of course, the list can go on. The challenges of looking at these norms, you'll find that they are basically divided into do's and do nots. Basically what we should do and what we should avoid doing as states in terms of our policies and strategies. Our responsibilities individually and collectively within the continent in preventing harms that can be posed by threats emanating from information and communication technology uses. Threats that can affect international peace and security. How, you can read through the norms. I will scan quickly through them, but I would like to highlight a few things. It's very important to see whenever there is a reference to all relevant information, to sharing information, to exchange of information and cooperation among countries. These are central. You'll find in most norms there is reference. Some reference to these concepts. It's very important also in the information age to address privacy. Next, please. So while we are navigating through these norms, it's very important to look at critical infrastructure that exists within Africa. Critical infrastructures in our, key economic sectors, in banking, in the telecommunication, healthcare, education, entertainment, and all sorts of business, and of course in government business. These are, in many cases, are critical. Among the very important critical infrastructure is the energy sector, whether it is in the power generation, the power grids, management of resources, whether it is oil, even water resources and others. Many of our infrastructure now in Africa and across the globe are controlled by using ICTs. And there you'll find a few measures in the principles outcome of the UNGGE work address how to, we need to identify the critical infrastructure and to try to protect them and to collaborate between different states to assist in this protection. This is an effort that requires collective collaboration. The private sector is key in many countries in Africa and across the globe. The private sector owns and operates key infrastructure within the continent. Collaboration between government, the private sector, and the professional association is key, and professionals are key. Olaf's presentation focused on the brains. The brain power in Africa is key, and I will come to that later. The challenges of cybersecurity are emerging. They will keep changing over time. So we need to focus also on creating computer emergency response teams, or cybersecurity incident response teams, CERTs or CSERTs, in every state, and empowering them is very important. At the national level, at the sectoral level, you'll find in the norm number 11 a focus on this. Again, we'll come to that later. Next. In addition to the norms of and principles for cybersecurity that were generated by the UNGGE, the UNGGE reports include also confidence building measures. Security is key, but security, safety, privacy, and trust are very much linked. And during a time of a crisis, this is not the time to build a partnership, but it has to be done ahead of the crisis time. That's why the UNGGE reports included confidence building measures that are voluntarily, concepts, and states are encouraged to adopt them. As I mentioned, these reports were adopted by the General Assembly of the UN. So we have a common basis for, Africans to work through. These concepts enrich and support transparency. It supports collaboration, and it helps enhance capabilities in Africa to face growing cyber challenges. Next, please. Okay. In dealing with or reading through these confidence building measures, we need to realize that we need to deploy available resources. I mentioned the CERTs and the CSERTs as technical resource, but also we need to realize that security is not only the responsibility of the technical people, it is the responsibility of everybody, the whole society, diplomats, decision makers, companies, government, professional associations, individuals. They need to be aware. We all need to be aware of the growing challenges and really build partnership and to try to strengthen these partnerships ahead of a crisis time. The international law and the applicability of the international law was key to the development of these norms, and they still remain central to the success of the implementation. Next. Next, please. If we look at the pillars of an African, please, if we can go one slide back. The pillars of an African cybersecurity strategy. At the heart of it, we need to have political and organizational, strategic, and logistic support. Without that, nothing will really materialize. At the African continent, we have the African Union, which has really been leading in developing the Malabo Convention on cybersecurity and data protection. It was referenced in the previous sections of this webinar. I'd like to mention this is also in the context of a legal framework that group us all in Africa and would help us synergize our legislation to have this starting point to deal with really cyber criminals and threats. We need to have the organizational framework to deploy our mechanisms, our policies to make them materialize within Africa. It was mentioned by Olaf, and this is rightfully really, the industry development of cybersecurity in Africa is key to the success. The role of Africans and capacity building of African talents and enriching the skills at all levels, at the basic skills. I come from Egypt, so let us think about pyramids. There is a basic knowledge at the really the bottom of the pyramid. It's very broad, it has to touch upon everybody. Cybersecurity is everybody's business, not the professionals. Then as you go near the top of the pyramid, you'll find the more specialized, the decision maker, the C-level officials, and so on and so forth. All of them need to realize it's not awareness of cybersecurity threats, but also awareness of their expected roles and responsibilities in this age. Regional collaboration and international collaboration is key to the success of any policy at the continent level, at the national level. Next, please. These are my final points here on the challenges that we face. Rapid migration to digital platform is a reality now in Africa and globally. It poses a lot of opportunities. We don't need to be scared of by cybersecurity threats. There are lots of opportunities for growth, for development in Africa, and there are challenges because of the threats. We need to address these challenges. Partnerships is key. Really creating these extensive community partnerships, partnerships between government, the private sector, research and education institutions, business associations, civil society. They have roles, they have key roles, not just an honorary position. They are driving, they are in the driver's seat. Cybersecurity is the responsibility of us all. With this, I'd like to leave you, and perhaps we can pick up on some of these issues later on in the discussions. And I look forward to questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Sharif. Just to address another question that has arisen, the African Union, our Secretariat, will make this slide deck available after the event. We'll send them out to your emails. So thank you very much for that. Next, we're going to talk about basically what the technical community is doing. And it goes beyond, I think, the issues of COVID-19, but I think COVID-19 is a good starting point for Jean-Robert to basically tell us or inform us about how the technical community is responding. Jean-Robert, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Distinguished colleague and friend, I will start by exploring the digital transformation strategy of the African Union. Next, please. Then have a quick overview of the issue related to the continent. Then speak about what the technical community is doing in terms of overview, but also gap analysis, and put some perspective for way forward and opportunities. Next, please. Digital transformation for me is solving everyday's problem with technology. The African Union Digital Transformation Strategy defines cross-cutting team with cybersecurity, privacy, and personal data protection being one of them. The new normal of social distancing requires strategic alignment that fits into the context. Today, it's COVID-19. Tomorrow, it can be anything that drives increasing telecommuting activities, pushes for virtual events, more demand for goods, services, and cloud adoption. The way we tackle those challenges will accelerate, disrupt, optimize the transformation strategy. Three drivers have proven being important: political commitment, economic incentive, and social impact. Senior officials, for example, have encouraged action for technology, broadband, and internet adoption, removing barriers, calling for technology innovation, mainly in fintech, health, and banking. We also want bold steps for the prevention of abuse, again, the infrastructure and services. Next, please. COVID has taught me the medical jargon of symptoms, transmission vectors, and environmental conditions. It helps me describe Africa Tech Challenge. I mean, service provisioning, protecting vulnerable population online, technology readiness to support online activities, including secure remote working, dealing with increasing insider threat due to user error, lack of basic hygiene and good practices, misconfiguration, and increasing malware activities, including various forms of phishing and ransomware targeting organizations because cyber criminals believe that the stress to stay online will make them pay. Lack of network visibility, supply chain issue, various cases of user data exposure. There has also been an increasing proliferation of fake news, and surprisingly for Africa, an increase of impersonation and romance fraud. It looks like people are doing interesting things online. The push for more application and the appetite for mobile technology brings other challenge. The prevalence of numerous devices that cannot receive security updates, deployment of old technology, lack of protection mechanism. Olaf talked about encryption, the absence of basic software, IGN architecture principle. At the same time, users suffer from digital literacy and language barrier. Imagine my grandfather, who does not speak French or English, using now a mobile phone to communicate, receive money, and order his medicine from pharmacy. Data collected reveal many things. Increased risk condition as more vulnerable devices, poorly configured, are coming online and staying active. Increase in the mobile world, increased IoT device added to botnet, huge number of vulnerable mobile devices, lack of proper control, all technology like 2G, 3G, and others still in use, increasing mobile risk with the usage of mobile banking and mobile health. High risk vulnerability in every application that we have audited with licensing issue and the usage of components with known vulnerabilities or even outdated. But there is room for improvement. Many actors are tackling the challenge, including the African Union, the regional economic condition, and nation states. The African Technical Organization, like previous, okay, you can stay here. So the African Technical Organization, Africa CERT, AFCENIC, AFNOG, AFPIF, the RENS, Internet Society, and the Computer Emergency Response Team are among of them. There are also unstructured response from security engineers and individuals. At Africa CERT, for example, we foster cooperation and coordination among incident response teams, promoting information sharing and capability building to ensure that teams are capable to deliver their services. Nations, about 21, have developed national cybersecurity strategy that determine and communicate their political and economic objectives in cyberspace. 21 nations have established computer emergency response teams that are being active, responding, providing guidance, education, and awareness. I recommend that you check the activities on their website. About 13 operators have adopted ISOC mutual agreed norm for routing security, a global initiative to reduce the most common routing threats. We also see an appetite for incident response capability within service provider. We face challenge to report incident to businesses and receive at times threats for legal action. Nonetheless, organizations are doing their best to respond. There has been effort within the RENS to establish and develop incident response capabilities and awareness raising activities. AFRINIC, the regional internet registry for Africa, is working on WHOIS quality, IPv6 adoption, and capacity building around IP resource management, infrastructure operation. AFRINIC has also established a government working group to engage policymakers. The AFTLD is working to improve secure registry operation practice. The AF community in global and security researchers are actively collaborating in capacity building initiatives, open standard adoption, and cybersecurity awareness. So what is missing? Looking at the GFCE working group team that you see at the right, there are still huge gaps to address. We ask nations to make cybersecurity a priority by developing national strategy, establishing CSET teams, and developing legal framework. The Internet Infrastructure Guidelines for Africa that Olaf talked about made recommendation that, in my view, must be translated into directive. Mobile technology plays a critical role in Africa's digital transformation. Fighting mobile abuse is a priority. We ask operators to adopt AUCSEG mounts. Afrinic and its community must address the WIS data quality issue and the absence of abuse contact so that people can report issue when they see them. Business must make effort towards operational security. African technology makers, the one we call a tech hub, should take the lead to implement, promote security and privacy operation, application security, product security and vulnerability disclosure practice, and establish collaboration with the security community. Initiatives are in place to build African-level threat data that will guide policymakers and help prioritization of capacity building projects. All stakeholders should join this initiative, including the African Anti-Abuse Working Group and the Continental Awareness Raising Campaign in progress. The way forward, I'm often told to perceive challenge for capacity building in Africa. Africa is poor and doesn't have the resources. Africa lacks skill. Next, please. Those, in my opinion, are misconceptions. Africa's cyber issues are due to improperly managed governance. We need to redefine our strategic priorities and align people, process, technology to meet our goal and objectives. Security and privacy consideration during product and service life cycle are paramount. Further, we should stop working in silo, duplicating effort and thinking that we are in competition. A holistic view and better collaboration is vital. My final word will be a call for every stakeholders and player of the African continent to plug a hole. Then the African cyberspace will become more resilient and will remain an engine of development, growth, and opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Jean-Robert. I think your call is very important. And I think also many a time in Africa, we think that cybersecurity is a burden and we do not see it as an opportunity. So I thank you very much for that. So moving forward, we now have Dr. Nenna, who's going to talk about basically the African educational sector. And I think from most of the previous speakers, we have begun to understand that without human resource capacity building, without the teaching, the learning, the research, and of course, the general awareness, we are probably not going anywhere. So Nenna, are you ready for us?
Absolutely.
Please go ahead, knock them out.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be part of this continuing discussions about Africa's internet resilience during COVID-19. Today, I will be speaking about cybersecurity measures and ensuring cybersecurity in the African education sector. Slide, please. A lot of discussions keep going on about cybersecurity in government, businesses, corporations, with very little consideration about what is happening in the educational sector. And cybersecurity is very important as well for the education institution, particularly in Africa, when we consider most of these vulnerabilities that are being discussed. I'll start by saying that COVID-19 has changed education forever. It is something that is not being argued about. It is fact that COVID-19 has changed education forever. According to UNESCO, right now you have over 102 billion children out of schools because of the school closures during this pandemic. And generally, this closure has also affected over 60% of the world's students' population. So as a result of this, there has been a rise in e-learning, there has been a rise in technology-enhanced learning in various parts of the world. If you look at the graph here, you would find that even though there was a use of technology before COVID, by the time the world went into a global lockdown, there was already 138 billion students who had to start learning remotely. Next slide, please. And so why are we discussing cybersecurity implication today? I wouldn't want to repeat everyone. Olaf, JR has discussed the fact that because of the pandemic, there has actually been an increase in cybersecurity. While there are different opinions as regards how countries feel the impact of cyber attacks, COVID-19 themed attacks during this period, what is important is that there has been an increase. Now, research has also noted that before COVID-19, there was already a high growth in adoption of education technology. And as it is, by 2025, it would have reached over $350 billion in investment for education. Now, the implication of this is that as schools are adopting more technology, engaging in remote learning, information security will become increasingly vital. Educational institutions store a lot of sensitive data. Educational institutions are also a hub for finance, school fees, funding, resources, all these go through educational institutions. So even though we keep talking about the financial industry, educational institutions are also vulnerable in this situation of cyber attacks. Next slide, please. And what happened in Africa? So there was this sudden move to remote learning, virtual learning, which has not essentially been our culture. I joined in a webinar in May, and the head of the human resources for science and technology in African Union was saying that if we were to discuss education in Africa during COVID-19, the member states were not so prepared for the health crisis. Education has been fundamentally traditional in Africa. What I mean by traditional, going to school, face-to-face learning. It is more of a new culture now that everything has moved online. Virtual learning, distance learning has not been something that was very common in Africa. So this unplanned and rapid move to e-learning with little training, insufficient bandwidth, and little preparation has exposed the vulnerability of the education sector. Olaf pointed out that now you have people using private infrastructure, private tools to engage in businesses, taking off things from offices which are not fundamentally protected and using them at home. This has also exposed universities. And like I will say, every country, I've said this before, every country has been exposed to this. And the 2019 Know Before research report pointed out that Africans are even unprepared for cyber threats. And I wonder how much this will affect the educational institutions. Next slide, please. Now, why is this a problem? Why do we keep discussing this issue? And this has a ripple effect on our educational institutions. Cyber attacks are no less frequent or less severe in the education sector because of lack of cybersecurity legal frameworks, lack of policy. A huge digital illiteracy in Africa is a problem for the education sector. It is a problem that needs to be addressed. The weak cybersecurity systems, information security, lack of staffing, lack of training, lack of technical know-how in terms of cybersecurity is a huge issue when you consider education institutions in Africa. And of course, this cannot be overly emphasized, the poor infrastructure as well. 2 years ago, I was writing a paper on ICT education ICT in legal education in Africa. And I came across a report by the World Bank that said that the bandwidth for an average university in Africa was equivalent to the broadband in a home in Europe. And even at that, it is so expensive. So this has been a problem even before now, which further exposes the vulnerabilities of institutions. Next, please. Now, one may ask, why do we say education is a target for cybercrime? Number one, data theft. Schools, universities, educational institutions harbor so much data, sensitive data, personal data, information related to students, lecturers, teachers, parents, what have you. And so definitely there will be a hub for data theft, identity theft, and others. DDoS attacks, which is very common for disruption, for productivity. This is also happening in schools. And of course, we all pay school fees, governments fund schools. So cyber criminals will attack educational sectors because of financial gain. They would attack schools because of money involved. And also espionage. During these COVID times, institutions, universities have been at the forefront of research. Most universities have been taking the lead in terms of research into COVID-19. And so the quest for information at this time has become sort of a data mine, a gold mine. Information has become a gold mine in this time of COVID-19 as well. A lot of schools have to deal with intellectual property. And so it makes them exposed and a target for cybercrime. And how is the education sector targeted? In the same way, generally, phishing, ransomware, and a huge lack of awareness. This is a huge problem in Africa, I must say. When you consider teaching and learning in Africa, there is a general lack of awareness on even the importance of technology for education, talk less of the cybersecurity issues. And of course, a poor cyber hygiene. A lot of learning, training needs to go into the necessity of cyber hygiene for schools. And what are these challenges for African education in particular? There is a lack of policy. Now, I'm not saying policy in terms of education. Of course, there are so many policies. I mean, absence of policies in reference to cyber security. A lack of funding and resources. Cybersecurity generally does not seem to be a priority in Africa. So of course, the ripple effect will mean that in the education sector, there is also that lack of priority or policy or priority consideration for cybersecurity. Cultural issues. This is very, very important. At this period, I found that a lot of teachers, a lot of students taking away work that was meant to be private into public spaces. We have a culture of using cyber cafes, using public domains for things that are very private, and this has also generally affected. There have been reports of issues related to virtual learning, attacks on those platforms because of these related issues, and generally as well, poor staffing and poor training. There is a lack of trained staff who are aware of what cybersecurity measures mean in many of our educational institutions. Next slide, please. Now, how can we ensure cybersecurity in the African educational sector? This is not a one-way traffic. First of all, I'll call for digital cooperation because importantly, we need cooperation with all stakeholders. Olaf pointed this out in detail. It is very important. And when we discuss ICTs, when we discuss cybersecurity in Africa, stakeholders must involve the educational sector, not just the civil societies. Academia has become very, very important. I would also laud the effort of the African Union Commission. Last year, the Virtual Pan-African University was established. And I would call on the African Union to see this as a platform to extend cybersecurity measures. Yes, we need e-learning, But at the same time, while we engage in online distance learning, we should also think about the cybersecurity efforts. If the educational sector is hampered by cybersecurity challenges, the ripple effect will spread to other parts of society. For the government, I will always say this, it is important for African governments to ratify the Malabo Convention. That is the starting point for cybersecurity so that we can come together, harmonize laws, harmonize policies to ensure that we build a resilient African internet, and of course, including the educational sector. The schools need to make cybersecurity a priority. While cybersecurity is important to protect against financial loss, it is also important to protect students from harm. Children are vulnerable, students are vulnerable, so that we can ensure a robust sector, staffing, funding, authentication, firewalls, restriction of unsecure personal devices, monitoring of networks, creation of incident response plans. And this is something that will be very important during COVID-19 for schools to ensure that there are incident response plans. How do you create opportunity for staffs to report incidents, for students to report incidents? And for the students, I am very particular or worried about little children who can be exposed to cyberbullying, cyber stalking, online sexual harassment. It is important that the schools pick up education, training, and awareness at this point in time. For the industry, let's look at ensuring, even as basis of corporate social responsibility, making cybersecurity infrastructure cost efficient for the African region. Let's ensure user trust and also look at ways to cut costs and engage in ensuring that cybersecurity is pushed forward. Finally, I'll talk about data collection. This is something that is very lacking in this area. If the government can create avenues for response or reporting mechanisms, that way we can begin to collect data. When we are definite about what the problem is, the extent of the problem, we will be able to deal with it as well robustly. So data collection is very important. Finally, I would say that technology, ICT has a multiplier effect in technology. It is very important. Technology enhanced learning is a culture we must imbibe even after COVID-19. But that culture will not be effective. That culture will not be valuable if we do not ensure a cyber secured educational institution. We need to make it work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very, very much, Nenna. I appreciate the passion and the energy. It's really appreciated. Now, given that we've looked at what I would say Olaf has given us the bubble, we looked at Sheriff in terms of the overall strategic issues to consider. And Jean-Robert was able to provide us an insight into what the technical community is doing. And of course, Nenna has basically given us this cross-beam, cross-cutting issue of education with a specific reference to the educational sector. So now we're going to move to John, and basically he's going to talk about our rights, because really, I'm sure many of us may not necessarily find this technology of the internet and the like very nice if we feel that our rights and our privacy are being somehow violated or taken for granted. So John, please talk about our digital rights and go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone.
Could you speak up a bit louder, please?
Thank you, Chair.
Excellent.
I was saying good afternoon to everybody. I would like to welcome to my presentation. Of course, we prepared this with my friend Michael. So I will be presenting the COVID-19 in relation to these digital rights. Can we go to the next slide, please? What are the digital rights? These are the constitutional rights. They are fundamental rights. They are also human rights, and they are found in most of constitutions in democratic states. And even the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection of 2014 recognized these rights. And they are digital rights because some of them do not have equivalence in our offline world. For example, the right to be forgotten. This cannot work in the offline world. Now, when we talk of coronavirus, this respiratory disease, which is caused by COVID-19 virus, the measures that governments have adopted in most countries have to some extent violated these digital rights or threatened those digital rights. And that is why it becomes crucial to discuss this and also to chart the way forward through which government may fight this coronavirus, but at the same time promoting digital rights. Can we go to the next slide, please? Next. Next, please. So the measures that governments have adopted in terms of surveillance, contact tracing, detection of COVID-19 have implication to digital rights, in particular, the right to privacy. And if when you're fighting COVID-19, contact tracing is key. Now, the questions that one may ask is when you're tracing these persons or these suspects of probably having coronavirus, what measures have been set in place to protect privacy of those individuals? The government's aim of detecting COVID-19 is appreciated. However, we need to balance with other interests. We know there are other technical measures that have been adopted. For example, the use of mobile applications. So apart from manual tracking or tracing of individuals, but also we have mobile applications that helps to trace. And in other instances, alerting authorities, health authorities, on those individuals who have been suspected of having COVID-19 or those who were already seen to have COVID-19 and they have started treatment. So these mobile applications, the challenge is that some of them are developed by private companies. Now, you have personal data that will be now held by these private companies, and we don't know for how long those data are kept and with who or what individuals or companies they're sharing with. So that leaves a lot of questions. We also have the challenge in terms of contact tracing, where you have cross-border issues, where individuals traveling from one country to another. Now here, a person is tested, the data is retained there or shared with other countries. So that again poses a challenge in terms of privacy. Can we move to next slide, please? So we have issues of surveillance there as well. Now, government, as I said earlier on, have issued guidance and notices of how to deal with this COVID-19, and which have relaxed the digital rights, in particular data privacy regulations, where they exist. Because in some countries, like ours, Tanzania, we don't have data protection legislation, which of course is a challenge. So we have the measures against COVID-19, but we don't have the law, like the data protection legislation. And therefore, it these measures poses risk of violation of personal data or people privacy. So assessing what data collection and surveillance activities need to take place to ensure safety and also protection of privacy. We need an independent oversight committee with representations from or representative from legal, health, and even privacy agencies. This should be established to oversee ongoing development of applications, for example, those that are used for contact tracing. We also need to know the information ecosystem, the data governance, etc. So public health authorities should be involved in all stages of the selection, development, and even when we start rolling out this. We need also to do evaluation of these apps to ensure that they protect public health, but at the same time, consider privacy and data protection. So we are saying some of measures, we just draw some examples here, that could bring some privacy challenges. You go to a mall, someone takes, have to check your temperature. In other cases, you are supposed to declare health of your health status, family, and others that you have contacted with. So you have to make declaration. There's also mandatory, of course, we have self-reporting as well. For those who are high-risk individuals, they have to report themselves. So we have manual and electronic contact tracing that also brings, as I said earlier, that also brings some privacy challenges. Next. Next, please. So there are some questions that we can always ask, which we can use as that we could use as checklists. So the first question would be: is COVID-19, I mean, this contact tracing lawful? Lawful, it means it has to be authorized by the law. I know in some countries where they had emergency legislation to address these COVID-19 or to state the measures that will be adopting in detection and even surveillance. We could also use sunset laws. With sunset laws, you have to state when surveillance is going to end. Say, for example, after COVID-19, the surveillance will end. But in other countries, you find they have an open-ended legislation that doesn't really indicate when this surveillance is going to end. So the other question is in terms of data retention. For how long the data is going to be kept? Who retains these particular data? So we need judicial oversight, where, especially when it comes to surveillance, because you are affecting people's rights, you need judicial oversight. Because judiciary, we know this is a custodian of justice, so we believe there won't be any bias. We have also, the law should also provide kind of legal sanctions for those who are breaching, those who are violating the laws, for example, where there are data breaches or misuse, etc. There's also another cardinal principle when it comes to data processing, the informed consent. I mean, the data subject has to consent to the processing. And this has to be informed in the sense that they should know what kind of data is collected, how is it stored, for how long is it retained, so then they know the implications of the information they're providing. So here we are saying data subject informed consent is important. We could also adopt what we call code is law approach, and in this case, privacy by design. So the technology itself should be designed in a way that it can assist to promote or to protect privacy. So by the mere designing, it has to embed certain technical measures that safeguard privacy. We have also another question here. It's about data sovereignty. Now, because sometimes we have cross-border issues. You have a person traveling from one country to another. This person, the data may be collected in one country and shared to another one. So we are saying, in case of cloud computing, for example, where you have certain apps that probably are used for contact tracing, we need to know where the data is stored, because there must be some kind of sovereign control. The data should not move to third countries unless that other country has also certain measures to safeguard privacy. So we can also use encryption techniques. We can also use contracts where you have terms and conditions, so that indicate that becomes like a contract. We should also enact laws to secure digital rights. And here, I mean, for instance, privacy, data protection legislation. We could also ratify Malabo Conventions, especially for countries that have not done that, including mine. Tanzania has not ratified Malabo Conventions. So if we ratify this one, we will be in a position to safeguard digital rights, in particular, privacy. Of course, other rights includes in this, is also included in digital rights. For instance, you're talking about access to information. They are very important. Freedom of expression online, that's very important. But also we have norms. We have UNGG norms. Sherif talked about this. And these are also very important, especially when you look at the norm number 5. This deals with it talks about states should respect UN resolutions on human rights, especially on the internet and the privacy right in the digital age. So this one is also echoed in the African Union Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection Convention. So next, please.
We have to begin to wrap up, please.
Yes, because I'm almost done. So these questions we can, of course, discuss later on. I don't have to read them now. So I would thank all participants for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. We're very, very grateful for your time and effort. We are going to move into the phase for the participants. We hope you have additional questions for the members, for the experts here. This is an opportunity to ask them directly. So far, I think we only have one key question from Mr. Anthony Hall. And the question basically, are there plans to incorporate the right to internet access into the African Union Commission's Malabo Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection? He says to avoid what is happening in Ethiopia. I'm going to call first on John to give us some insight on that specific question. And then I'm also going to call on Nenna because they are both legal luminaries in addition to their cyber component, but they're in they have slightly different focus. So I think we will be able to get a more rounded perspective and response. So John, very quickly, the right to internet access, can you keep it within a minute, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think that requires its own webinar, but I'll say a few words on internet access, the right to internet access. We have what we call net neutrality. And of course, we know governments have, in some countries, shut down the internet, and so people do not have access to internet. In some other countries, like Finland, for example, they already have this as a fundamental right. So there's a constitutional right to access the internet, and the government provides bandwidth. So in African context, I would say this has not happened yet. But again, even if we put it in the Malabo Convention, putting it in the Malabo Convention is one thing, and implementing it is another. So I would say states, especially communication regulators, the regulatory authorities, they have mandate and they can secure internet access. They can allow they can have, for example, rules or regulations that there is no blocking of content, there is no filtering that is not necessary for the security, cybersecurity, I mean. And they can also disallow capping. You know, we have price capping. Thank you, Chair. Maybe I should end up there.
Yes, thank you, John.
Yeah.
Nenna, could you give us also your views on this issue?
I'll be a bit forward in saying that, yes, what is happening in Ethiopia, though not within this discourse, is a blatant disregard for freedom of expression, particularly freedom of speech and freedom of information, and we still shouldn't be talking about internet shutdowns. However, the question of internet access, while related to cybersecurity, is more dealt with digital rights. And John has encapsulated this by saying that most African states do not have digital rights in place. So it's something we need to go back and discuss, ensuring internet access. It's not something, to be sincere, it's not something you can call for as a civil or political right. We can only ask for a progressive realization of that right in Africa. Again, you have to consider the financial state of African states. So yes, it's important we begin to have that discourse. Of course, it cannot be within the Malabo Convention as it is, but it will be something to consider going forward in terms of progressing digital rights in Africa.
Okay, thank you very much. There is it's listed as an anonymous attendee. Government in Africa, especially Nigeria, have lots of roles to play in ensuring smooth running and success of online learning, and particularly cybersecure platforms during this lockdown and post-lockdown. He observes, or she observes, that there are no preparations for sudden changes from traditional learning to e-learning. Presently, lots of burdens are imposed on teachers due to lack of training prior to this time. And actually, if I may, Nenna, just to follow up and get you to respond to this, do you think that there is a need for our pedagogy, the art, science, or profession of teaching, depending on your definition, as it relates to online education? And this question from the anonymous attendee, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, please. A huge problem in terms of curricula in Africa is a lack of learning in terms of ICTs. I remember when I went to the university, we had a core course on ICT. We learned without even computers. So we're taught how to shift, control on paper without practical. So yes, it's fundamental that curriculum imbibes this, because if this was the case, going back to the question that was asked, this sudden transition will not affect us the way it has affected us. Sincerely, from experience, from my relationship with colleagues, there has been a lot of struggling for learners and for teachers at the same time. And the person who has asked the question is right. There is a lot of role to play for governments. Education is a right. Education should be seen as a human right. Unfortunately, it is non-justiciable. So if it is a right, we must think of measures to enforce them. Until we begin to talk of enforcement, monitoring mechanisms, we may not go very far in this. So yes, the government has a huge role to play, and basically in terms of policies as well. Because of time, I'm trying to.
Excellent, thank you very much. There are other resource persons, but if I may, because this is dealing with the legislation, go back to John very briefly. Michael Akakpo basically says, in the wake of COVID-19, African governments, including his, are enacting subsidiary legislations that infringe on citizens' digital rights and data protection, including demanding customer data from telcos. And really his question, John, is how can citizens leverage on international conventions such as the Malabo Convention to seek redress? And then after you, I'll let Olaf add something. John, do you have anything to say?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I think the first thing, in order for these citizens to get redress, they have, their respective countries should first ratify Malabo Convention. Although we know as best practice, countries may use the Malabo Convention without even ratification. But it would be, on a legitimate ground, it would be difficult for you, for example, to start questioning about, your interests while the law has not been ratified. So I think the country should first ratify so that it becomes part of their laws, and then they can start seeking remedy. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, John. Olaf, if you may, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Abdul. Yeah, to hook into that problem of education, I think the fact that educators have to start using e-learning methods while not using to it is a global phenomena. I have experienced this in my own house. My wife is a teacher, and I think it's an incredible opportunity. That the realization that effective e-learning can be done is an enormous opportunity to reach more people with education. So I would embrace this also as a learning exercise. And obviously, COVID is somewhat of a black swan event. It came out of nothing fairly quickly, and prepping for this type of thing is obviously always very difficult. And as society, I think we are learning what is critical to society through this type of global crisis, and we'll be able to, in the next event, react sooner, but also take the learnings of the event and implement them in our daily lives. And I hope that e-learning is one of these learnings where we can be much more efficient in reaching more kids to give them education.
Excellent, thank you. Now, I just want to let you know that because the African Union representatives specifically, because we as an expert group do not work for the African Union and therefore would be very hesitant to speak on their behalf, we will try to get your concerns and questions to them so that they can answer more directly. But if I may, I would like to call on Sheriff basically to address some of the dynamics of the legal framework and its implementation. But I'd like you to also maybe, again, in the context of what second question Anthony Hall had asked, what are the challenges in getting more AU member countries to adopt the Malabo Convention? Sheriff, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start by saying really actually a phrase that I like a lot. Perfect is enemy of the good. If we want to perfect something and we spend our life perfecting it without looking for the implementations, we might miss the good that is in our hands now. This is very typical for policies and legal frameworks. The legal framework, especially in cyberspace, should be dynamic, should change over time. However, in Africa, we have far more, I think, important issues. Among them is awareness. Awareness, while it is fuzzy, we need to have awareness in the general public because they need to adopt and believe in the legislation. We have to have awareness at all levels, in the law enforcement, in the among the really prosecutors, the judges, and so forth, and training and capacity building. They need to understand really what it means to enforce this. I've had the experience working with lawyers at the international level, at the legal, the national level over the past 20 years. And sometimes if they don't really know how the technology work precisely, they try to apply articles that were developed before the technology was developed. And as such, for the technology side of it, it becomes really difficult to enforce. So legal is important. It has to be dynamic. Enforcement requires training, requires capacity buildings, requires awareness continuously, and also it requires an organizational framework. We talk about data protection. Europe has been working on data protection for the past 25 years, establishing frameworks, establishing data commissioners, and so on and so forth. And it needs time. It's not just borrowing a piece of legislation, you think that this is enforceable. It is difficult. It requires also the political will and the public support. Going back to the point of the Malabo Convention, I think I agree with John that countries can apply this or try to borrow this immediately, even if the ratification for any reason is taking longer time, they can adopt it in the local legislation and work towards this the adoption and ratification of the Malabo Convention, because it helps, as Nina mentioned in her presentation also, it helps having a homogeneous African legal framework in cyberspace.
If I may interrupt, do you have any insight into some of the specific steps a country may need to take to ratify the Malabo Convention?
Sure, it needs to start at the highest level in the executive government, and then it has to get the endorsement of the political support. That's actually quite challenging. You cannot start, building legislation requires all the partners to work together, but adopting it requires the political will. It requires the parliament and that's where awareness is. And unfortunately, sometimes we need to wait for a catastrophe to happen for people to really believe in the importance of this piece of legislation. We had this over and over again over the past 20 years of my professional life, for instance. It was always an instant that would trigger the adoption. And I've seen this happening not just in Egypt, not just in Africa, but across the globe. So I think COVID can offer a unique opportunity for us to start pushing for really this political will to exist. And the African Union hopefully can help us reach out to the utmost number or the largest number of African countries to really realize the necessity of this Malabo Convention. It is not a nice to have legislation. It is something that would support the society and will help develop the socioeconomic development in Africa and push it further. Education is key. Education, as Nena was mentioning, is not just for students, it's for everybody. Lifelong learning is important, and really we are working with legislators and so forth. I had to work with people who are maybe 20 years older than me, more senior judges, to convince them. And they, to my surprise, I was pleasantly surprised to see they are very open once they understand to support. And that's where you need the partnership.
Thank you. Jean-Robert, I believe this question might be for you. Again, I think it's anonymous attendee. I think that is Mr. Tai Lambo, if I'm not mistaken. And the question, Jean-Robert, is in all presentations, one word is key: collaboration. To run an effective CSIRT, collaboration and trust building is core. So beyond the narrative of collaborating, really the question here is, how do we put this into action? And so just the emphasis, Jean-Robert, what are the actionable steps to put this in place? Trust.
I think Olaf mentioned a couple of things about trust. Trust cannot build in paper. It has to come when people have the will to come together to discuss openly the issue that they are facing, their challenges, and to find together solution to meet those challenges. I'm not saying that we have to agree on everything. There will be disagreement, but setting up the framework and having the will to openly discuss and solve problems is paramount to achieve trust.
Thank you. If I may move quickly on so that we can begin to round up soon. A note from Ibrahim Audu basically says the production of smartphones and other similar gadgets undoubtedly enhances insecurity of computer systems and networks. What are manufacturers doing about it? Well, I'll just quickly say that, unfortunately, I don't think any of us are manufacturers, but the truth of the matter is that manufacturers follow government guidelines, policies, and regulations. So I think for me, the question would be more, how are the governments making sure that the manufacturers comply? I think this would be more pertinent. Molehi from South Africa, I believe, you did mention that one of the reasons the Malabo Convention has not been ratified by many African countries is because of their discomfort with the privacy legislation. And your question basically is, are there any AU initiatives that are considered confidence building measures in the context of UN norms? So I'll go to Sherif on that one.
I think it was mentioned just a few minutes ago, we don't need to agree on everything to apply it. There are basic concepts, and if there are specific articles that are at one point in time are seen to be not compatible with local legislations or need some tweaking, and we had the same, challenge in Egypt, then countries can make reservations on these articles. But in full, it has to be really agreed upon that we need a common starting point. And I think that would be our starting point, and the African Union can help us because, again, a top-down approach is much easier than starting lobbying within lower levels.
And are there any AU initiatives that you would say can be considered as confidence-building norms in the context of the UN norms? Any existing ones?
Sure. I think if you visit all the norms and the confidence building measures, you can find quite a few of them. This group, for instance, is really addressing the point of having collaboration, establishing a network of points of contacts in Africa. It deals with capacity building in CSIRTs. All these are among the confidence building measures in the UN reports. So we already have a few of them in place. The point is we need to have more energy, more dynamics, and more inertia. And you get this when you get the political will for endorsement. When I was a member of the UNGGE in 2012, 2013, I was the only one from Africa, a continent of 50 countries. I was the only one. And I was the only one from the Middle East as well. So you can add a few more countries, so 60 countries. And I lobbied to increase African participation. This was supported East and West. And we ended up with expanding the group from 15 representatives to 25. And now, and since then it has several. So I think if we build momentum, if we build commitment from government, and contribution from Africans, we can get a great return on investment.
Okay, I just wanted to mention very quickly that in terms of confidence building, the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, and I would recommend each and every one of us participating to visit the CyBuild portal. Basically, it's one of the tools that we need to leverage. I see that Anthony Hall has his hand up. Could you just be patient with me for a moment? Malik Alassane, you basically have said many children use the internet today. Is the AU working with different governments for the insertion of digital hygiene programs in the academic curricula? What actions are being taken? As I said before, we are a bit hesitant to speak directly on behalf of the AU because we are not staff of the AU. But Nenna, in terms of the concept of hygiene programs in the academic curricula, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, I would say you've said it all. We can't necessarily speak for the African Union. One of the issues I highlighted during my presentation is the fact that schools have to undertake this as a training. Now, going forward, it has to be beyond just teaching ICTs in school. Cybersecurity is for everyone. It shouldn't just be for computer science students. So it should be included as part of the curriculum. We need to go back and revise curriculums in schools. When we teach computer science, when we teach ICT awareness, we should also think about teaching cybersecurity. A lot of child pornography, online sexual harassment, cyberbullying is going on. We do not even have laws in Africa to tackle that. It goes back to individuals, educational institutions for now to imbibe that in curriculum, in training, in raising awareness, in campaigns, and in every measure that is important.
Okay, Anthony Hall, before I let you speak, let's just address the question that you have posted here. I'm giving preference to the posts in the Q&A. My apologies for that, but in order to save time. And basically, you're talking about the Africa AU Digital Transformation Strategy 2020-2030 and the issue of manpower. And again, your question is that it is clear that from that strategy, the AU identified 100,000, a gap of 100,000 cybersecurity personnel by this year. So what are the efforts being made by the AU to close this gap? Very quickly, Jean-Robert, do you have any insights on this, please?
So again, I won't speak on behalf of the AU, but there has been many organizations. One of them that Olaf mentioned is AFNOG. There is the African Internet Summit, but there are some regional and local capacity building initiatives. I think we should leverage on them.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Francis, Oliver Kubaro, you have a question for Dr. Obena, and this is about the steps for the Malabo ratification. I believe Sheriff has already done some justice to that. So if you don't mind, if we could move to the next issue, can you give, and I'll ask John to answer quickly and also then Nenna, but can you give us more clarification on the difference between a digital rights strategy, a personal data protection strategy, and cybersecurity strategy? And if you could dumb it down for us non-legal persons, please. Starting with John.
Thank you. In fact, we have a cybersecurity strategy.
What is it?
Of course, with the cybersecurity strategy, this is just a document that indicates the vision of the government on how they are going to handle issues of cybersecurity, the resources that they would like to allocate, and the other things. And also, it may lead to development of a policy in a legislation. So a strategy just indicates the vision of a government on what they want to achieve on a particular thing. And here we're talking about cybersecurity. And if it is in terms of digital rights, it will still be a vision of the government in terms of those rights, but it's very rare to have what we call digital rights strategy, because normally these are legal issues that you find in legislation. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Nedna, do you have any additional insights? Really, in terms of what's the difference between digital rights, personal data protection, and cybersecurity, the three strategies?
Yeah, John has highlighted that very well. When you say strategy, on paper, you're saying this is prima facie proof that we're interested in doing this and this is what we want to do. But of course, the strategy as a whole framework cannot be in isolation of the technical aspect, like the person who asked the question mentioned. It cannot be in isolation of law enforcement, judiciary, government, because then when your strategy says we want to provide digital rights, you also need money to do that. So it involves everybody, and we're not just speaking in terms of legislation. So strategy tends to portray what we want to do, but then as a whole, the strategy involves every stakeholder, every sector that is relevant.
But I think what the question is trying to understand, what's the difference between the strategies? Not really what a strategy is.
When you talk about data protection, we're looking at protecting data, how you protect privacy, how you protect personal data, legislations involved in telling you what you can do with data, what data controllers can do, how long can you keep data, who would have access to data. But then when you talk about cybersecurity, we're looking at internet resilience. How do we protect our critical infrastructure? How do we ensure cybersecurity, protect against cybercrime, and how we can police cyberspace? So yes, essentially, there are two strategies aimed at different outcomes.
Okay, very quickly, Brahim, I must apologize. We do have the French translators of the voice of this webinar. Unfortunately, they are in Addis, and because of the internet shutdown, they are unable to join us. So please, my profound apologies. In terms of French editions of the slides, I think we'll try to, at least Jean-Robert, I know you'll be able to do yours quite quickly. I don't know about some of the others, but we'll look into it. Benson, very quickly, you are asking about cooperation with the cybersecurity insurance industries for policies for draft data theft and possibly other cyber crimes. Let me open it. Does any of the members feel they have some response in terms of the African insurance industry and data theft? Any of my colleagues?
If I may,
Yes.
okay. I have a comment. When it comes to cyber insurance, to protecting data, especially the challenges of cloud computing where data is moving all around, we need to realize what type of data. We need to classify data. The term classifying data is not present in most African countries. If you don't classify data, you don't know what the legislation would mean to different sectors. For instance, you have sensitive data, you have personal data, and personal data and sensitive data have different levels of sensitivity, and as such are treated differently. When there is a legislation that says that you need to store data for a long period of time, it has implications technically and financially and operationally. When you're storing data over a long period of time, you need to know the platforms that are being used, how to have the skills to manage this, and who would be responsible for availing the data. If there is a problem with the data, how to correct the data, and the right to be forgotten and so forth. This requires a lot of skills, a lot of dynamics, a lot of organizational support. I apologize for the long answer, but I think a piece of legislation, the few lines talking about data protection translates into a plan of action at all levels, top down. So we need to think about all levels at the same time.
Thank you. Just a quick word to Eric. I believe the issues of how to mitigate or factors militating against nations ratifying the Malabo Convention, I think we've already been through that. And also, Pascal, really, we're not in a position to speak on behalf of the African Union, but we will pass your questions across to them. I think Mr. Lambo again, what aspect of cyberspace does Africa control? For effective African cyberspace to be secured, Africa must own an aspect of the cyber community. And Jean-Robert, I'm going to put this hot potato in your lap. And again, how can Africans work together? How can we make, attack the business interests, lives and properties of fellow Africans, and nothing has been done. Africa Francophone countries are planning to adopt the ECO instead of the CFA. Well, the point is that, okay. So basically, what aspect of cyberspace does Africa control? And, does this help, hinder? What can be done? Your thoughts, Jean-Robert?
I think that control is a very strong and large word. I don't even think that due to the nature of cyberspace, we can claim control of anything. However, we have the responsibility to take steps and action to make sure that we make a right use of the opportunities that the cyberspace is providing us. We have to make sure that whenever we develop goods and services that are released in the cyberspace, we have taken into consideration the security and privacy implication through the life cycle of the product and services. And finally, we have to ensure that we understand what we mean by data, the data definition, and we ensure that the data that we are putting into the cyberspace, that we don't control as soon as it gets out of our hand. We have to make sure that those data are data that we want people to see and take steps to protect those data and those information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're actually about 4 minutes left for our time slot. Very quickly, Nenna, Molay has asked the question that has the education sector only been targeted nationally, or is there cross-border infrastructure that has also been attacked? And are there opportunities for international cooperation? So Nenna, I'd like your views on that. And then I'd like to follow up with, again, Jean-Robert, if you can throw some insight in terms of the NRENs, the National Research Education Networks, in terms of the weaknesses that have been exploited. But Nenna, let's start with you, please.
Yes.
And if you can make it very quick.
Yes, please. I'll follow from what Jean-Robert just said earlier. The internet is not tied to any geographically proximate location, so I cannot argue that yes, these attacks have basically been national. It has cut across across jurisdictional boundaries. Recently, there was a call by the US arresting some cyber criminals, a huge number of them Nigerians. This just happened a few weeks back. And it was noted that most of them were gathering information all the way from Dubai, and it affected school employees, hospital staff, and things like that. So it's just that we're discussing Africa here. Yes, it's not just nationally, but of course, in terms of cooperation, that is why we call for digital cooperation between states, because no one state, no one institution can protect themselves essentially alone against cybersecurity. It would need cooperation and all that.
Okay.
Time. So
Jean-Robert, the research and education networks that are national, but also, cut across the continent.
So an interesting fact about the RENs is that they are working together to build bandwidth to meet the bandwidth challenges that Nina talked about. In 2012, if my memory serves me well, we were engaged when they were studying that process to remind them that they have to think at the time when they were putting together those resources and building capacity. They have to think about security and privacy implication. And there are, I think there are interesting developments that I've been noticing. In my presentation earlier, I mentioned that 6 RENs, for example, have set up incident response teams, and others are building incident response capability. And they are doing that through collaboration, cooperation, through the AFREN, the African Regional Education Network, but also through regional REN. One of them is, for example, WACREN, the West African Regional Education Network Organization. And another one is Ubuntu Alliance, that is a collaboration and coordination platform for research and education network in the East African community. So it's very interesting to see that the establishment of a regional network forum of RENs, but also an African level forum of REN that are working together to identify their challenges, discussing them, and finding solution to overcome the challenge that they are facing.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Robert. Colleagues, we really have to round up. We are actually at the top of the hour as we speak. Those who are unable to stay with us, if you have to leave, we do understand. But I would just implore my colleagues, if we could have just a few more minutes of your time, if possible. I'd like to collapse Ndiaga and Uche Dominic's questions together and put that across to Sherif, if you don't mind. How can the UA collaborate with the regional community? I guess that's the African Union, with ECOWAS to deal with security issues, cybersecurity issues on the one hand, and then Uche talks about the military in curtailing the menace of cyber threats. Is there any collaboration within militaries? Sherif, if you could very, very quickly answer this, because we actually are over time.
Well, I don't work for the military, and actually I don't work for the government even now. But I'll tell you, there are collaboration in various frameworks. In Africa, I was invited a couple of years ago to address military personnel from Africa in an event meant for raising awareness. I was among the civilians there. So there are cooperations and there are training that is required, because the military is responsible for defending our nations in Africa, and as such they are very open, and in my home country they are open to collaborate with civilian organizations. They work with the telecom regulators, they work with professional providers, companies, and so on and so forth. So there are opportunities. We need to see where the AU can play a role here. And I'm not an AU person, I'm not an African Union person, but I think there is a common agenda here that can be put between them. The challenge here, cyber threats are affecting our societies. We need to collaborate to defend this together at all levels. We need education, we need capacity building, we need partners from the private sector, we need academia, we need different collaborations across different professional organizations. The professional organization that I'm proud to belong to first, which is the Forum for Incident Information Security Incident Response Teams, is an international organization that can also help. So it depends on our agenda. I'm glad that this webinar, I hope that it puts a highlight and put focus on really the importance of cybersecurity for Africa's development and the unique opportunities that are opening up during COVID era and beyond. I remember working in Africa 20, 25 years ago. People would say Africans are not using the internet. Why do you worry about it? Now, I think in this era, people will not say the same. So I hope that people are more receptive, especially at the highest level, and the African Union can be central to the success of our efforts as such. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sherif. If I may just quickly add to that, first and foremost, I know that the AU is collaborating working with the regional bodies. And also, again, back to the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, I know that several of their members are also doing a lot of collaboration, both with the AU and at the regional level, and very specifically ECOWAS, and also some of the nations in West Africa. In terms of what Uche has said, I'm sure Uche sounds like a Nigerian name. You're probably aware that the Defense Space Agency in Nigeria is the military arm that looks into and looks after issues of cyber. So it has two main components, the outer space and the cyberspace. Their headquarters is in Abuja. So I believe the session, Howard may need to confirm if the sessions are recorded. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for Brian in Arabic, or rather, I think the answer really is that we are not in a position to provide the Arabic translation. Indeed, we've not been in a position to provide any translation for this particular webinar. We need to wrap up. Michael, maybe we should ask Olaf. does Africa have the necessary financial and human resources based on your experience in other climes? So you may not necessarily know much about Africa, although I believe you do. Do we have the necessary financial and human resources to implement varied cybersecurity strategies? It would be nice to have what I'd call an external person's view of Africa.
So I can only base that answer on a perception, not on data. And my perception would be just a very short answer: no.
Okay.
I do believe I do believe that there are sufficient smart people in Africa to build that capacity. It is not a matter of talent. From my experience, what I've seen when I visited Africa, working with people there, as soon as people are handed resources and knowledge and smarts, they head off. As soon as there are opportunities, people will grab them. It's that's very clear. There are so many opportunities. And again, I think they are there for Africans to harvest them.
Okay. Sheriff, Anthony Hall basically has asked the question, is the intention for each African nation to develop data privacy regulations / framework as of what we've seen in countries like Nigeria, or will it be at the continental level? And I think this may speak to some aspects of the Malabo Convention. And so can you end on this, please? Can you address
Sure. Let us borrow, because the Malabo Convention really was inspired in part by the European Union directives on data protection. Let us be inspired by that and its implementation over the past 25 years or so. I think it's good to have a common platform for legislations, and the Malabo Convention can really serve as such. When it comes to implementing this, and this is where you have the challenge really, to have the people who are really knowledgeable on how to do the implementation, how to do the enforcement, how to do this in a really pragmatic way. I think this has to be coordinated, hopefully, to be coordinated to reduce the overhead for it. Implementation to be deployed technically could be localized at the national level to relieve some of the sensitivity of moving data around at the beginning. But countries will realize, like Olaf mentioned early on in this webinar, using encryption, using non-disclosure agreements and so forth, and confidence building measures, for instance, would help us really build this trust platform that can be shared across Africa using cloud computing technologies and other emerging encryption technologies and other technologies to relieve Africa from paying the price over and over again from country to country.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, can we move to the closing slide, please? I would like to say thank you so very, very much for your time, for your attention, particularly your questions. I think they were very, very enlightening, well, particularly for me, but I think for all the panelists, and indeed all the participants. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you very, very much. Have a very good day, and I appreciate your participation. Please send emails. It's on the list somewhere. Let us know what we did right and maybe what we can do better. Have a very, very good day. Thank you very, very much, everybody.